A young woman whispers, "Please, don't take the cloth off." But the billionaire doesn't listen. He pulls it away. And the moment their eyes meet, he breaks down crying. No one knew what hid behind that cloth, not the scars on his face, but the guilt that nearly destroyed him. She was just a quiet nurse, trying to rebuild her life after losing everything. He was the man whose empire helped take it all away. Now, trapped together in one room, their broken worlds collide. But when she learns the truth about what he did, and he discovers the secret she's been hiding, their fragile bond could heal them both, or tear them apart forever. Because sometimes the hardest thing to face is the person who shows you what forgiveness really costs. Will they find redemption in each other's scars, or will the past ruin their last chance at grace? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The fluorescent lights hummed softly over the polished hallway floors of Serenity Hills Rehabilitation Center. It was almost 7 in the evening, the time when visitors left, lights dimmed, and the real quiet began. Melanie Brooks tied her hair into a neat bun and adjusted her name badge, the same way she did every night. Her shoes squeaked lightly on the clean tiles as she walked toward the nurse's station. She liked this hour. The noise of the day faded, and peace settled like a warm blanket. The world outside might be harsh, but in this building she could focus on caring for people who needed her, people who couldn't hide their pain behind fancy clothes or fast words. "Melanie," called Mrs. Loretta Pierce from behind the counter, her warm, familiar voice breaking the silence. Loretta's silver curls glimmered under the ceiling light as she handed over a clipboard. "You're getting a new patient tonight, honey. Room 12? Melanie glanced at the chart. The name made her pause. Declan Langford. She'd heard that name before. Loretta smiled softly, as if she already knew what Melanie was thinking. Yes, that Declan Langford. Billionaire, developer, all that. Got into a bad car accident about 2 months ago. They transferred him here for private care. Melanie blinked. The same man who... Loretta nodded. Yes, the one whose company bought up half the old West End. The mention sent a dull ache through Melanie's chest. Her grandmother's house had been there once, her safe place, her world. When the company bulldozed the block to build a new shopping complex, it had felt like losing a part of her soul. She took a slow breath. "And he's my patient?" "Yours," Loretta confirmed. "He requested a quiet caregiver, someone gentle." She tilted her head, her knowing eyes twinkling. "I told them I've got just the one." Melanie tried to smile, though her hands felt cold. "I'll take care of him," she said quietly. Room 12 sat at the end of the hall, separated from the others. A sign on the door read, "Private recovery, authorized staff only." Melanie hesitated before knocking softly. "Come in," came a low, rough voice from inside. She opened the door. The room was dim, lit only by a bedside lamp. Curtains were drawn tight, keeping the city lights out. Machines beeped gently beside the bed, their sounds steady but cold. The man on the bed sat upright, his head wrapped in white gauze. A thin surgical cloth draped over the lower half of his face. His eyes, pale grey and alert, studied her in silence. Melanie stepped closer, her heart pounding. "Good evening, Mr. Langford. I'm here to check your vitals." He nodded slightly but didn't speak. She could feel the tension in the room, thick like fog. As she checked the monitors, she noticed the bandage on his arm, freshly changed but uneven. "Did you do this yourself?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then muttered, "Didn't want anyone else touching it." Melanie gave a faint smile. "Well, I'm afraid you'll have to trust me tonight." Something flickered in his gaze. Maybe doubt, maybe curiosity. "You're new," he said finally. "Just new to you," she replied, focusing on her work. A moment passed. He studied her quietly, as though trying to place her face. "You're different from the others," he said at last. "Different how?" she asked without looking up. "You're not trying to fill the silence." Melanie set down her clipboard. Sometimes silence is the best medicine. That earned the smallest smile from him, though it vanished as quickly as it appeared. The hours passed slowly. Melanie moved around the room, checking his IV, adjusting pillows, noting his temperature. Declan spoke little, and when he did, it was usually short. Questions about time or medicine. But when she thought he'd fallen asleep, she heard him whisper something under his breath. A name. Evelyn. Melanie froze. Her grandmother's name. She turned slightly, unsure if she'd misheard. "What did you say?" He didn't answer. His eyes were shut, his chest rising in slow, shallow breaths. She shook off the thought and quietly hummed a tune her grandmother used to sing, an old gospel melody about mercy and rest. It was something she did for patience when the night grew heavy. But suddenly, Declan's hand twitched. His eyes opened, wide and startled. "That song." His voice was a rasp. Melanie stopped mid-note. "It's just something I sing sometimes." His voice cracked, almost pleading. "Where did you learn it?" She hesitated. "My grandmother used to sing it. Before she passed." He turned his face away, toward the curtained window. "My mother used to sing it too." The silence that followed felt alive, as if two distant memories had brushed against each other. By midnight, the center was quiet. Melanie gathered her things, preparing to leave, but before she could, Declan spoke again. "Do you believe in second chances?" he asked suddenly. She paused at the door. "I believe in trying again, even if it hurts." He nodded faintly, eyes fixed on nothing. "Then maybe you'll understand me someday." Melanie said nothing. She only whispered goodnight and stepped into the hall. As she walked away, Loretta's words echoed in her mind. "He's the man who built half the city." And she couldn't help but think, "He's also the man who took everything from me." That night, back in her small apartment, Melanie made tea and sat by the window. The city lights twinkled far away, cold and distant. She thought of his eyes, the scars hidden behind that cloth, and the strange sadness in his voice. He was a man people admired once, wealthy, untouchable. Now he sat alone in a dark room, wrapped in gauze and regret. And somehow, God had placed her there. She didn't know if it was punishment or purpose, but as the night deepened and rain began to fall against the glass, she found herself whispering a quiet prayer she hadn't said in years. "Lord, if this is what you want, help me see why." The next evening, when Melanie returned for her shift, Loretta handed her a tray of medication. "He's been quiet all day," she said softly. "Maybe tonight will be better." Melanie nodded and walked down the hall, her pulse steady but unsure. When she reached room 12, she took a deep breath before opening the door. Inside, Declan sat in the same position as before, still shadowed and hidden behind his cloth. But this time, when he turned to her, his voice was softer. "You came back," he said quietly. Melanie met his gaze. "I said I would." For a moment they simply looked at each other, two broken souls bound by something neither could yet name. And somewhere, in the hush of that sterile room, the story of their healing began. The next morning dawned grey and heavy, with rain tapping steadily against the windows of Serenity Hills. Melanie arrived before sunrise, the sky still a deep blue. She always liked to come early, Those quiet moments before the world woke helped her think clearly. The hallway smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Loretta smiled as Melanie hung up her coat. Room 12 was restless last night, Loretta said gently, glancing toward the end of the hall. Might be one of those days. Melanie nodded. I'll keep an eye on him. She poured herself a small cup of coffee, though her stomach felt too tight to drink it. Declan Langford had stayed in her mind all night. The way his voice had cracked, the way he'd asked about second chances, it all stirred something she couldn't explain. When she reached his room, the door was half open. He was awake, sitting by the window this time. The morning light brushed against the edge of his white gauze, but the cloth still hid his lower face. Good morning, she said softly. He didn't turn at first. You're early, he replied, his voice deep but tired. I like mornings, she said. They feel clean, like a fresh start. He looked at her then. His eyes were pale grey, but not cold. They had the weight of a man who'd seen too much. Do you really believe in fresh starts? He asked quietly. She hesitated, folding her arms. I have to, she said after a moment. Otherwise, what's the point of waking up? Something like a smile tugged at the edge of his bandages. You're not like the others. Melanie moved closer to check his IV line. You said that before. I meant it, he replied. Most people look at me and see what's missing. You look at me like there's something left. She didn't answer. She didn't know how. Instead, she checked the monitors and adjusted his blanket. Do you want the curtains open? She asked. He hesitated. Halfway, he said finally. The light burns sometimes. She nodded, drawing them slightly apart. The room brightened enough to show the walls, white, clean, with a single photograph of mountains above the bed. As she turned back, Declan said quietly, I used to own those. Own what? The land in that picture, he murmured. Bought it years ago, planned to turn it into a luxury resort. Did you? He shook his head. No. Locals fought the project. Said it would ruin their town. I backed off eventually. But the company kept going. Melanie's chest tightened. He spoke so casually about things that changed people's lives. People like her grandmother. Do you ever think about what happens to the people after? She asked softly. His brows furrowed. What do you mean? When you build something new, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Someone's home gets torn down to make room for it. He stared at her, stunned. Then his voice dropped low. You lost something I built, didn't you? She looked at him but said nothing. The silence stretched between them, heavy and raw. I didn't know, he whispered. I never meant to. Melanie cut him off gently. You don't have to explain, Mr. Langford. It's not my place to judge. But her throat felt tight as she said it. The day passed in slow, uneasy quiet. Melanie kept to her duties, helping other patients and trying not to think of the billionaire in room 12. But every time she passed his door, her heart beat faster. When she returned that evening, he was awake again, sitting upright with a small book in his lap. Could you read for me? He asked suddenly as she entered. Melanie blinked. Read what? He held up the book. It was a worn Bible, the kind often found in hospital drawers. Psalm 91, he said softly. I can't sleep without hearing it lately. Melanie hesitated, but took the book. She sat down beside the bed and began to read, her voice calm and low. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. Declan closed his eyes. His hands trembled slightly under the sheet. When she finished, he said, You sound like someone who's been there. Under that shadow? She gave a faint smile. Maybe I have. Why do you work here? He asked suddenly. It's quiet, she said. And the people here, they don't pretend. He nodded slowly. You're running from something. Her hands froze. Excuse me? He looked at her gently. You talk like someone who knows what guilt feels like. Melanie felt her chest tighten. We all have things we wish we could undo, she said, but you can't change what's already happened. He lowered his gaze. You can try to make it right. Their eyes met again, and for a moment both seemed to see their own reflection in the other's pain. That night, a thunderstorm rolled in. The power flickered once, then steadied. Melanie stayed late to check on patients, but when she reached Declan's room, she found him breathing fast, gripping the edge of the blanket. What's wrong? She asked quickly. Bandage came loose, he muttered. I tried to fix it myself. Let me see. He froze. No, don't. Please, she said, her voice gentle. I need to clean the wound. He turned away. You don't understand. People stare. They always stare. I'm not people, she said softly. He hesitated, then reached up and began untying the cloth from his face. Melanie felt her pulse quicken. Please, don't take the cloth off, she whispered, her voice trembling. But he did. And when he turned to her, she saw not horror, but grief. Deep, human grief. His face bore scars, yes, but his eyes shone with unbearable pain. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he covered his face with his hands. They said I should be grateful to be alive, he whispered, but I look in the mirror and see everything I ruined. I hurt people. I built walls where homes stood. And now I can't even stand my own reflection. Melanie's chest ached. She stepped closer and placed a clean cloth in his hands. You're not your scars, she said softly. They're just proof you survived. He looked at her, eyes wet, voice breaking. Then why do they still hurt so much? Because healing takes time, she whispered. They sat in silence as the storm roared outside, lightning flashing faintly through the curtains. For the first time, Declan didn't hide his face. And for the first time, Melanie saw not the billionaire who had taken her grandmother's home, but a man who had lost his own. By morning, the rain had stopped. The world outside looked washed clean, as if the night had rinsed away something heavy. Declan sat by the window, unbandaged now, staring out at the pale sunrise. When Melanie entered, he didn't flinch or turn away. Good morning, she said quietly. He smiled. Small, but real. It is. Melanie felt a warmth spread through her chest she hadn't expected. The walls between them had cracked, just enough for light to seep in, and neither of them knew it yet, but that single moment of honesty would change everything that came next. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the narrow windows of Serenity Hills, painting warm streaks across the tiled floor. Melanie walked into the break room to fill her mug with weak coffee. She felt restless. The image of Declan Langford crying in the storm the night before wouldn't leave her mind. Loretta stood by the counter, spreading butter on toast. You look like you didn't sleep a wink, she said, glancing over her glasses. I didn't, Melanie admitted with a soft sigh. It was a hard night. Room 12? Melanie nodded. She hesitated. He took the cloth off. Loretta froze mid-motion, eyebrows lifting. He did? Yes, and he cried. Loretta's voice softened. Then that man's finally starting to heal. Melanie wasn't sure. There was something deeper under Declan's tears, something heavier than pain. Guilt. Regret, a kind of sorrow that only came from realizing you'd hurt others without meaning to. She left the break room with her heart unsettled, carrying a tray of supplies toward Declan's room. When she stepped in, the curtains were wide open for the first time. Sunlight filled the space, bright and sharp, falling across the clean white sheets. Declan sat up straight, his face uncovered. The scars were still healing, faint pink lines tracing down one side of his cheek. He looked older, tired, but human. "Morning," he said. Melanie blinked. "You opened the curtains." He nodded. "I figured hiding in the dark wasn't helping much." She smiled faintly. "Progress. I owe you for that," he said. She shook her head. "You don't owe me anything. Just try not to undo your dressings again." He laughed, a quiet, rough sound that surprised them both. "I'll try." As she moved around the room, straightening his sheets, she noticed a folder lying on the bedside table, Langford Development Group. The name sent a pulse of memory through her chest. "Are you still working?" she asked. He shook his head. "Just trying to figure out what's left to fix." She hesitated, then asked softly, "Does it ever stop? Feeling like you broke something that can't be repaired?" He looked up sharply. "Why do you ask that?" "Because I know the feeling," she said, her voice quiet. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You said your grandmother used to sing that song," he said finally. "What was her name?" "Evelyn Brooks." He froze. His fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket. "What did you say?" She frowned. "Evelyn Brooks. Why?" He turned away, his face pale. "My company. We bought a block of land near West End. There was an old house there, a small clinic. We were told it was abandoned." Melanie's voice caught in her throat. "It wasn't abandoned. That was my grandmother's house." The silence between them turned sharp as glass. Declan swallowed hard. "I didn't know. They told me everyone had relocated. I never—" Melanie shook her head. "You didn't care enough to find out." He looked like she had struck him. "You're right," he said quietly. "I didn't. I was too busy building things to notice what I was tearing down." Her hands trembled as she placed the clipboard down. That clinic was everything to her, she said, her voice shaking. She treated veterans who couldn't afford doctors, single mothers, anyone who walked through the door. Declan's eyes glistened. "Evelyn Brooks," he repeated softly. "That name was in one of the old files. I thought it was just a title. I didn't know she was real." Melanie backed away a step, tears stinging her eyes. She was real. She was home. He looked down, his shoulders heavy with shame. "Then I owe you more than I can ever repay." "No," she whispered. "You can't fix that. Some things you just live with." That night, after her shift, Melanie sat in the small chapel near the lobby. The flicker of candlelight danced across the stained glass window. She hadn't prayed in months, maybe years, but something about Declan's face haunted her. The guilt, the brokenness. "Lord," she whispered, her hands clasped tight. "Why did you bring me here? To him? After everything?" Her voice cracked, but the chapel stayed silent. Loretta appeared in the doorway, walking softly. "I thought I'd find you here." Melanie quickly wiped her eyes. "Just needed a minute." Loretta sat beside her. "Sometimes God puts the wound right in front of us so we can see how far we've come." Melanie shook her head. "I don't want to heal this one. I want to forget it." Loretta smiled gently. "Baby, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means letting go of who you were when it happened." Melanie stared at the candles. "He destroyed everything my grandmother built." "And maybe," Loretta said softly, "you're the one meant to rebuild it." The next day, Melanie walked into Declan's room with quiet resolve. He looked up immediately, his expression uncertain. "I shouldn't have said what I said yesterday," he began. "You were right to be angry." I'm not angry, she said. Not anymore. He frowned. Then what are you? Confused, she admitted. Because I want to hate you, but I can't. Declan's voice dropped low. If I could go back, I'd give her clinic back. Every brick, every wall, everything. She looked at him for a long time, then said, You can't give it back, but maybe you can help build something new. His eyes widened. What do you mean? You said you're trying to figure out what's left to fix. She said, So fix that. Rebuild my grandmother's clinic. He blinked, stunned. With you? Yes, she said simply. With me. Declan exhaled, his eyes softening. You'd work with me, after everything. I'd work for the people she helped, she said. Not for you, not for me. A faint smile touched his lips. Then let's do it. Melanie crossed her arms. I'll believe it when I see it. He nodded. You will. Later that night, as Melanie walked to her car, the air smelled like rain again. She paused, looking up at the dark clouds gathering over the parking lot. Somewhere deep in her chest, hope stirred. Small and fragile, but real. Maybe, she thought, this was why she'd been sent here. Not to punish him, but to rebuild what had been lost. As lightning flashed in the distance, she whispered into the wind. We'll see if you mean it, Mr. Langford. And for the first time since her grandmother's passing, the words didn't sound bitter. They sounded like a beginning. 2 days passed quietly at Serenity Hills. Melanie tried to keep her focus on her regular duties, changing linens, checking vitals, and helping patients walk laps around the garden path. But her thoughts kept drifting back to Declan Langford. Every time she passed room 12, she felt that same strange mix of anger and curiosity. She didn't want to care about him, not after everything his company had done. But something about the way he had whispered her grandmother's name had left a mark she couldn't ignore. That afternoon, Loretta found her at the supply cart, lost in thought. You've been stirring that coffee for 10 minutes, sugar, she said kindly. Melanie smiled weakly. Guess I'm just thinking too hard again. That man's getting under your skin, Loretta teased, but her tone was gentle. Maybe, Melanie admitted, but it's not like that. It's just strange. I spent years hating the people who tore down Grandma's house, and now I'm bringing one of them soup. Loretta set a warm hand on her shoulder. God has a funny way of setting up meetings we'd rather avoid. Melanie nodded slowly. He asked me to help him fix it, to rebuild what he destroyed. Loretta's eyebrows lifted. And what did you say? I said I'd believe it when I see it. Loretta smiled. Sounds like you're giving him a chance. That's all Grace ever asks for. That evening, Melanie entered Declan's room with a clipboard and a wary look. He was sitting at his desk, wearing a grey sweater instead of the usual hospital gown. The bandages on his face were gone now, leaving faint scars that gave him a rugged, human kind of vulnerability. On the desk sat a laptop and a pile of architectural sketches. You've been busy, she said, surprised. He looked up, smiling faintly. Couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what you said. She crossed her arms. About rebuilding the clinic? Yes. He turned the laptop toward her. I drew up some plans. It's not perfect yet, but it's a start. Melanie hesitated, stepping closer. The screen showed blueprints of a modest 2-story building, large windows, a welcoming front porch, even a children's waiting room filled with sunlight. He pointed to the name across the top. The Evelyn Brooks Community Clinic. Melanie's breath caught. You really named it after her? He nodded. It's what she deserves. She stared at the screen, her throat tightening. You barely knew her name a week ago. I've learned a lot in a week, he said softly. Mostly about what I can't undo, but maybe what I can rebuild. Melanie blinked away sudden tears. You don't owe me this, Declan. He met her eyes. I owe her, and I owe every person I pushed aside trying to build my empire. She studied him for a long moment, then asked, Why now? He sighed, rubbing the scar on his cheek. When the accident happened, everyone told me it was a miracle I survived. But when I woke up, I realized I'd been alive for years and hadn't really lived. I just built things to fill the silence. He paused. Then you came along. You didn't see money or fame or pity. You saw a man who needed to stop hiding. You gave me something I haven't had in years. What's that? She asked quietly. Honesty. Melanie looked down at the plans again, her heart stirring with a mix of disbelief and something that felt dangerously close to hope. The next few days blurred into long hours of conversation, sketches, and meetings. Declan arranged for his assistant, Mr. Wright, to bring project documents and a list of potential locations. One afternoon, they spread maps across the hospital table. Declan pointed to a shaded block near the old West End. This is where your grandmother's clinic stood. We could rebuild here. Melanie's eyes softened. That land must cost a fortune now. I already own it, he said quietly. I bought it 15 years ago. It's been sitting empty ever since. She stared at him. You're serious. Dead serious. He replied. I think it's time to give it back. A heavy silence filled the room. Melanie could feel her heart pounding. Why me? She asked finally. You could hire 1,000 architects, project managers, PR people. I don't want a project manager, he said. I want someone who understands what this place is supposed to mean, someone who knows what healing looks like. She blinked back emotion. You mean me? He nodded. You're the only one who can bring your grandmother's dream back to life. Melanie shook her head slowly, torn between pride and fear. Declan, I'm not a doctor or a builder. I'm just a caregiver. He smiled faintly. That's exactly what she was. That's exactly what this place needs. That evening, as the sun dipped low over the Atlanta skyline, Melanie sat outside the building with Loretta, sipping sweet tea from paper cups. The air smelled faintly of honeysuckle. You should have seen it, she said, shaking her head. He had plans, blueprints, everything. He even put Grandma's name on the front. Loretta smiled, her eyes kind. Maybe the Lord really is writing a story bigger than you think. Melanie exhaled slowly. But what if it's not real? What if this is just another way for him to feel better about himself? Then you'll still be the one who kept your heart soft, Loretta said. And that's what matters most. Melanie smiled faintly. You always know what to say. Loretta chuckled. Honey, that's because I've had more years to mess it up first. They laughed together, the sound gentle in the quiet evening. The next morning, Declan was waiting for her in the garden. He stood near the stone fountain, holding 2 cups of coffee. I need to show you something, he said. Melanie took the cup and followed him toward the east side of the property. The hospital grounds ended at a chain-link fence, and beyond it stretched a vacant lot overgrown with grass and wildflowers. This land belongs to me, Declan said quietly. I was thinking, it could belong to you, to your grandmother's legacy. Melanie frowned. You're donating it? He nodded. And more than that, I want you to run the clinic once it's built. She stopped walking. Run it? Declan, I can't. You can, he interrupted softly. You already do, every day, in every patient you help. You've got your grandmother's heart. I see it. Melanie looked out at the field. A breeze stirred the tall grass. and for a moment she imagined the little wooden house that used to stand there, the smell of her grandmother's herbal ointments, the sound of her laughter drifting through the open door. Her voice wavered. She always said healing wasn't about medicine, it was about mercy. Declan nodded. Then let's build a place for both. Later that night, Melanie sat in her apartment, her mind spinning. Papers and sketches lay spread across her small table. She traced her fingers over the words Evelyn Brooks Community Clinic. Part of her wanted to trust him, to believe he'd changed. But the other part still remembered the bulldozers, the protests, the nights she'd held her grandmother's trembling hands as everything they loved was taken away. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Loretta. If God's opening a door, don't stand in the hallway too long. Melanie smiled through tears. She looked at the blueprints one last time, then whispered, "Okay, Grandma, let's see where this goes." The next morning, when she entered Declan's room, he was already sitting upright, a hopeful look in his eyes. "So?" he asked. Melanie took a deep breath. "I'll help you, but not for you. For the people she cared about." Declan nodded solemnly. "Fair enough." They stood there for a moment in quiet understanding. The past still hung between them, heavy and unresolved, but in that fragile silence something else began to grow. Not forgiveness yet, but faith in what could be. The first hint of summer touched the air at Serenity Hills, bringing soft sunlight and the smell of wet grass after a night rain. Melanie stood by the garden window, sipping her coffee and trying to steady her nerves. Today she and Declan were supposed to review the final paperwork for the clinic project. Loretta walked by, carrying a tray of patient charts. "You're fidgeting," she teased with a knowing grin. Melanie smiled sheepishly. "I just don't know if I'm ready to work this closely with him. It's strange. Strange can be good," Loretta said. "Means you're stepping out of the old and into something new." Melanie nodded. "I just hope he's serious about this." "He is," Loretta replied. "I've seen his eyes when he talks to you. That man's trying to do something right for once." That afternoon, Melanie met Declan in the garden behind the rehab center. The nurses called it the Healing Garden, a small sanctuary filled with roses, lavender, and a quiet fountain in the center. Declan waited near a wooden bench, a cane in one hand and a rolled set of blueprints under his arm. "You actually came," he said, smiling faintly. "I said I would," Melanie replied. "Besides, someone's got to make sure you don't build a skyscraper over Grandma's memory." He chuckled softly. "Fair enough." They sat on the bench, spreading the blueprints across the small table between them. Declan pointed at the drawing. "I've adjusted the design, added a community kitchen, a reading area, and a children's clinic. I remember you said your grandmother believed in feeding the soul as much as the body." Melanie's eyebrows lifted. "You remembered that?" "I remember everything you tell me," he said quietly. The words caught her off guard. She looked away quickly, pretending to study the plans. "It looks good," she said, her voice softer now. "It feels right." Declan nodded. "Then it's settled. We start next month." Melanie traced a finger along the paper lines. "I never thought I'd be part of something like this again." He smiled. "Maybe we're both getting a second chance." Over the next week, they began working side by side. Declan moved slowly, still recovering from his injuries, but his focus was sharp. Melanie admired how he asked for her input on everything, from the color of the walls to the waiting room chairs. One morning, as they stood by the window reviewing color palettes, Declan asked, "What would your grandmother have picked?" Melanie smiled. Something soft. "Blue, maybe," she said it reminded. "People of calm waters." He jotted it down without hesitation. "Blue it is." They spent hours together that day, talking about life between design notes. Declan told her about growing up in a small apartment with his mother, how his father worked 3 jobs, and how success had turned him into someone he didn't recognize. "I used to think money fixed everything," he said, his voice low. "Turns out it just made my mistakes louder." Melanie looked at him, sympathy softening her features. "You can't change what's already done, but you can still choose what kind of man you'll be tomorrow." Declan met her gaze. "You sound like someone who knows that lesson well." "Maybe," she said. "I've made mistakes too, some that still follow me." He tilted his head. "Like what?" Melanie hesitated, her hands tightening around the edge of the table. "It's not something I talk about, not yet." He nodded gently. "Then I'll wait." For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, but not judged. That evening, Loretta stopped by Declan's room as Melanie was helping him organize files. "Well, look at y'all," she said, chuckling. "Working like an old married couple." Melanie laughed, blushing slightly. "We're just trying to keep things organized." Declan smiled. "We're a good team." Loretta's eyes twinkled. "Good. Just remember, trust is built like a house, one brick at a time." After she left, Declan turned to Melanie. "She's right, you know. I don't trust easily, not since—" He paused, staring at the floor. "Since before the accident." "What happened?" she asked softly. He sighed. "I trusted people who used me. Business partners, friends, the kind who smile while they take from you." Melanie nodded slowly. "I know that feeling too well." The air between them grew quiet. Then Declan said, "Maybe that's why we're both here, to learn how to trust again." Melanie smiled faintly. "Maybe so." A few days later, they visited the old neighborhood where her grandmother's clinic once stood. The city noise surrounded them. Cars, construction, people rushing past. But beneath it all, Melanie could still hear echoes of the past. Laughter from the porch, the clinking of teacups, the sound of her grandmother's voice calling her name. Declan watched her carefully. "It's smaller than I imagined." "It was enough," she said softly. "Grandma always said you don't need big walls to heal people, just open doors." He looked around, his expression thoughtful. "Then we'll build something with more doors than walls." Melanie smiled through tears. She would have liked that. They stood there in silence for a while, the city buzzing around them. Declan turned to her suddenly. "Melanie, thank you." "For what?" "For giving me a chance to make things right." She looked up at him, the wind brushing a strand of hair across her cheek. "I'm not doing this for you," she said gently. "I'm doing it for her." He nodded. "I know, but maybe someday you'll let me do something for you too." The following morning, Melanie walked into the center's lobby and found a small box waiting for her on the counter. A note sat on top in neat handwriting. "For the woman who brought light into my darkness." Inside was a tiny silver locket engraved with her grandmother's initials, E.B. Melanie's breath caught. She found Declan later in the garden. "You didn't have to do this," she said, holding up the locket. "I know," he said quietly. "But I wanted to. I found a picture of the original clinic sign in an old city archive. The initials were carved just like that." Tears filled her eyes. "It's beautiful." He smiled softly. "Then it was worth it." That night, as Melanie prepared to leave, Declan called after her. "Melanie?" She turned in the doorway. He hesitated, then said, "I don't know what tomorrow will look like, but for the first time in years, I'm not afraid of it." Melanie smiled. "That's what hope feels like." As she stepped into the hallway, she caught Loretta watching from the nurse's station, a knowing smile on her face. "You see it too, don't you?" Melanie asked. Loretta grinned. "I see two people who thought they were lost, finding their way home." Melanie held the locket tightly in her hand as she walked away. For the first time in years, the ache in her chest didn't feel like grief. It felt like grace. The days that followed moved like sunlight over water, steady, bright, full of promise. For the first time in years, Melanie woke each morning feeling something new stirring inside her. Purpose. She no longer dreaded her shifts at Serenity Hills. Each day held meaning now. Meetings, planning sessions, phone calls, and late nights reviewing designs for the new Evelyn Brooks Community Clinic. Declan worked beside her every step of the way. Even when he walked with a slight limp or winced from pain, he showed up. He'd sit at the hospital cafe with his laptop open, surrounded by papers and blueprints, coffee growing cold beside him. When Melanie entered, he'd always look up and say the same thing with a soft smile. "I was waiting for you." On a warm Friday morning, they met with the City Council's Community Development Committee to present the project plans. Melanie wore a simple navy dress and held her grandmother's silver locket close to her chest for courage. Declan walked beside her, tall but humble, no longer hiding his scars. The meeting room buzzed with quiet chatter until the chairwoman said, "Mr. Langford, you have the floor." Declan gestured toward Melanie. "Actually, I'd like Miss Brooks to begin." Melanie froze. "Me?" He nodded. "No one can explain it better." Her palms dampened, but when she stepped to the podium, something inside her settled. She spoke, softly at first, then stronger. "This clinic isn't just a building. It's a promise to serve those who feel forgotten. My grandmother taught me that mercy heals deeper than medicine ever could. This clinic will carry on her work for generations to come." When she finished, the room was silent. Then, one by one, people began to nod. Declan stepped forward next. "I spent years building towers and calling them progress. Now I want to build something that restores what I broke." When the vote was called, the council approved the land use proposal unanimously. Melanie felt her throat tighten. "We did it," she whispered. Declan turned to her, his smile quiet but full of pride. "You did it." Later that day, they walked through the old neighborhood again, where construction would soon begin. The air buzzed with the sound of cicadas, and sunlight filtered through the branches of newly planted trees. "This was your grandmother's corner," Declan said, pointing at a patch of cracked sidewalk. "We'll rebuild her porch right there." Melanie closed her eyes, picturing it. The wooden steps, the smell of tea, the laughter that used to spill through the windows. She would have liked that, she murmured. Declan smiled faintly. "She'd be proud of you." They stood in the silence for a while. Then Melanie said softly, "Declan, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why me? You could have worked with anyone. Why put all this in my hands?" He looked out over the empty lot. "Because you're the first person who's ever looked at me and seen more than my mistakes. You make me want to be better." Melanie's heart fluttered in her chest, though she tried to hide it. "Maybe you already are," she said. He turned to her then, sunlight catching the scars on his face, and for the first time, she didn't see them at all. She saw the man he was becoming. A week later, the hospital cafe buzzed with news. A journalist from the Atlanta Chronicle had picked up the story about Declan's comeback, the billionaire philanthropist rebuilding a clinic in honor of a local community hero. "He's really changing the narrative," one nurse whispered. "From scandal to savior." Melanie overheard and smiled to herself. Maybe God really could turn ashes into beauty. That evening she found Declan in the therapy garden, surrounded by paperwork and approval forms. "You're working too hard again," she said, handing him a cup of sweet tea. He looked up and smiled. "You sound like Loretta. She's rubbing off on me." He took a sip, grimacing playfully. "Too sweet." She laughed. "That's the Southern way. You'll get used to it." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in soft orange and pink streaks. Declan leaned back, closing his eyes. "You ever wonder why God put certain people in our path?" "All the time," she said. He turned to her. "You ever think maybe he put you here for me?" Melanie looked down at her hands. "I think he put us both here for something bigger than either of us." Their eyes met, and neither spoke again for a while. The quiet between them said enough. By the following week, construction had officially begun. The sound of drills and hammers filled the air. Declan and Melanie visited the site every afternoon after her shift, watching as the skeleton of the building began to rise. One afternoon, a little boy from the neighborhood wandered over curious. He looked up at Declan's face, at the scars, and asked innocently, "Did it hurt?" Declan knelt down, smiling gently. "It did, but it made me stronger." The boy nodded, thoughtful. "My mama says scars mean you're a survivor." Melanie's heart swelled as she watched Declan chuckle softly and ruffle the boy's hair. When the boy left, Declan turned to her. "You see that? That's why this matters." Melanie nodded. "It's already healing people, and it's not even finished yet." A few evenings later, Declan hosted a small dinner at the hospital to thank the staff who had helped him recover. Loretta sat proudly at the table, teasing him like an old friend. "Never thought I'd see the day the mighty Declan Langford breaks bread with hospital nurses," she said with a laugh. Declan grinned. "Well, it turns out they're the real heroes." Melanie sat beside him, quiet but glowing. The locket around her neck shimmered in the candlelight. When the meal ended, Declan stood to give a toast. "This clinic isn't just a building," he said, looking at Melanie. "It's a second chance. For me, and for everyone who ever thought they'd lost hope. I wouldn't have found that hope without someone who refused to give up on grace." Everyone clapped, but Melanie looked down, cheeks warm. She could feel his eyes on her. After the dinner, they stepped out into the cool night air. The moon was high, silver light reflecting on the glass of the hospital windows. "Thank you for what you said," Melanie murmured. He smiled softly. "I meant every word." She hesitated, then said, "I'm proud of you, Declan. You're not the same man I met that night." He chuckled. "I sure hope not. Do you ever think about what comes next?" she asked. He looked thoughtful. "I think about tomorrow, about building something that lasts, and maybe about who I want to share it with." Melanie's heart skipped. "Declan." He raised his hand gently. "You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know." She smiled faintly. "You're getting good at this whole honesty thing." He laughed quietly. "You're the reason." As she drove home that night, the radio played softly, and the city lights blurred through her windshield. For the first time in years, Melanie let herself smile. Maybe life was finally changing for the better. Maybe grace had finally come full circle. But somewhere deep down, she felt a small whisper of unease, like a cloud waiting behind the sun. She didn't know it yet, but the light they'd found was about to be tested, because sometimes, before faith can grow, it must first be shaken. The morning of the clinic's grand opening dawned bright and golden, the kind of day that felt touched by heaven itself. The air was crisp, the sky wide and blue. Melanie stood outside the brand-new building, the Evelyn Brooks Community Clinic, and for the first time in years her heart felt light. Balloons in soft shades of blue and white swayed in the gentle wind. A long ribbon stretched across the porch, tied neatly at each end. Volunteers bustled about, arranging flowers, chairs, and gift baskets. The smell of fresh paint mixed with blooming roses from the nearby garden. Melanie glanced at the shiny new sign on the building. Her grandmother's name shimmered in silver letters against the clean white wall. Evelyn Brooks Community Clinic, healing hearts and hands. Declan walked up beside her, wearing a dark suit and a light blue tie. The sunlight caught the faint lines of his scars, but he didn't hide them. Not anymore. "Well?" he asked with a smile. "Does it look the way you imagined?" Melanie blinked away tears. Better. She'd be so proud. He looked at the sign, his expression tender. "Then I'll call it a success." Loretta joined them, holding a clipboard and beaming. "The mayor's on his way. The news crew's too. And Declan, don't forget your speech." He groaned softly. "Remind me again why I agreed to that." "Because you're the billionaire with the redemption story," Loretta teased. "And because the world needs to hear this one." Melanie chuckled. "You'll be fine. Just speak from the heart." Declan gave her a playful look. "That's easy to say when you're not the one holding a microphone." The crowd gathered quickly. Neighbors, former patients of Evelyn's, volunteers, even some of Declan's old business partners. The small plaza buzzed with excitement. Melanie stood near the front steps, clutching her grandmother's locket, whispering a quiet prayer. "Thank you, Lord, for bringing us this far." When the ceremony began, Loretta took the stage first, her voice steady and full of grace. "This clinic stands on the legacy of a woman who believed love was medicine. And today that same love is alive again." The crowd clapped warmly. Then she called Declan forward. He stepped up to the microphone, holding his notes but barely glancing at them. "When I was a younger man," he began, "I thought success meant building something tall enough that the world couldn't see my flaws. But no matter how high I built, I still felt hollow inside. I forgot that progress means nothing if it leaves people behind." He looked out at the audience, then at Melanie. "This clinic isn't about me. It's about redemption. About people who never stopped believing that mercy still matters. I wouldn't have found that belief again without the woman standing beside me today." Melanie's throat tightened as the crowd turned toward her. Applause rippled through the air. Declan smiled faintly, emotion thick in his voice. "Evelyn Brooks taught generations that love can heal any wound. Her granddaughter reminded me it's still true." When he finished, the mayor stepped up and cut the ribbon. Cameras flashed, cheers rose, and laughter filled the air. The clinic doors opened wide, sunlight pouring into the spotless lobby. Melanie could barely contain her tears as the first patients walked in. Young mothers, veterans, and children holding their parents' hands. It was everything her grandmother had dreamed of. Later that evening, after the crowds left, Melanie and Declan walked through the quiet halls. The smell of new wood and disinfectant lingered faintly. "Feels strange," Melanie said softly. "For the first time it's real." Declan smiled. "You made it real." She shook her head. "We did." He stopped walking and turned to her. "You know, I used to think buildings were the only way to leave a mark. But this place proves the best things we build are invisible. They live inside people." Melanie smiled, her eyes glistening. Grandma used to say the same thing. They reached the clinic's front porch just as the streetlights came on. Declan looked up at the sky, quiet for a moment, then said, "You ever wonder why grace feels like a second chance you don't deserve?" Melanie looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because that's exactly what it is." He smiled faintly. "Then I guess I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve mine." The next few weeks passed in a blur of joy and hard work. The clinic filled quickly with patients, families, veterans, children. Melanie became the natural leader, organizing schedules, managing volunteers, comforting anyone who walked through the doors. Declan was there every day, fixing shelves, cleaning floors, and greeting people with a humility that surprised everyone. The staff adored him. "You're a natural at this," Melanie teased one afternoon when she found him hammering a nameplate onto a door. He wiped his brow, smiling. "Not bad for a retired billionaire, huh?" She laughed. "You might make a decent handyman after all." "Careful," he said playfully. "I might hold you to that." But beneath the laughter, something deeper had begun to grow between them, something neither of them dared to name out loud. It showed in the way he looked at her when she wasn't watching, in how her smile lingered just a little longer when he entered the room. One evening, after closing, Declan found Melanie sitting in the clinic's quiet waiting room. The golden sunset spilled through the windows, bathing her in soft light. "I was just thinking," she said as he approached. "We really did it, didn't we?" He nodded. "You did." She looked up at him. "We both did. You rebuilt what you destroyed, Declan." He shook his head gently. "No, you rebuilt me." For a long moment they said nothing. Then, almost shyly, Declan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "I was saving this for today." Melanie frowned, opening it carefully. Inside was a simple card, an ownership certificate for the Evelyn Brooks Community Clinic, transferring all rights to her name. Her breath caught. "Declan, no, I can't." "You can," he said firmly. "This was never mine to keep." Tears filled her eyes. "You didn't have to." "I did," he said softly, "because now it's truly hers and yours." She covered her mouth, speechless. Declan's voice was gentle. "Thank you for showing me what redemption looks like." Before she could respond, a small group of reporters walked through the door, calling his name. "Mr. Langford, a quick statement for the Chronicle?" Declan straightened, smiling. "Of course." He gave them a few words about the clinic, the community, and the legacy of Evelyn Brooks. Cameras flashed, and microphones surrounded them. Melanie stood nearby, overwhelmed but proud. For the first time, the world was seeing Declan Langford not as a billionaire, but as a man reborn. As the last reporter packed up, Declan turned to Melanie. "You okay?" She smiled. "More than okay." They stood together in the doorway, watching the clinic lights glow against the night. The city seemed quiet for once, peaceful. "Melanie," he said softly, "you once told me God wasn't punishing me, that maybe he was preparing me." She nodded, eyes bright. "I still believe that." He smiled faintly. "So do I." The air between them hummed with unspoken feeling, but before either could say another word, Declan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his face changed. "What is it?" Melanie asked. He hesitated. "A news alert. Someone's digging into my old company files." "Is that bad?" He exhaled slowly. "I don't know yet." The joy in the air dimmed just slightly, like a cloud passing over the sun. Melanie frowned, sensing the shift. "It's probably nothing," she said gently. "Maybe," he murmured, but his tone said otherwise. They stood in the doorway for another moment, both smiling for the sake of hope. Neither of them knew that by the next sunrise, everything would change. The following week began with sunlight and hope. The clinic was thriving. The air inside always smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and warm coffee from the break room. Patients filled the chairs, children colored in the waiting area, and laughter echoed in the halls. Every morning, Melanie arrived early to unlock the doors. She loved those first quiet minutes. Just her, the hum of the lights, and the promise of another day helping others. It made her heart feel full. The place was alive, and so was she. Declan was everywhere, fixing, checking, talking, laughing. He was no longer the quiet, broken man hiding behind bandages. Now he wore rolled-up sleeves, carried boxes, and smiled easily. People had begun to call him Mr. Hope, and he always blushed at the nickname. Sometimes, when Melanie passed him, their eyes met for a heartbeat too long. She told herself it was friendship, gratitude, but in truth, something deeper had begun to stir, something fragile and real. The days felt golden, until the call came. Melanie was finishing charts in her small office when her phone buzzed. The number was blocked. Her first thought was that it might be one of the suppliers. She answered softly. "This is Melanie Brooks." A long pause followed. Then a voice she hadn't heard in years slid through the receiver like oil. "Well, if it isn't little Miss Do-Gooder." Her stomach twisted. "Marcus? Hey there, sweetheart." His tone was half laugh, half sneer. "Been a long time." She froze, unable to speak. Her mind raced. It had been almost 7 years since she'd last seen him, the man who'd nearly ruined her life. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice shaking despite herself. "Oh, don't sound so cold," he said. "I just wanted to congratulate you. Saw you on the news. The woman behind the Billionaire's redemption." Touching stuff. You always did know how to find your way into rich hearts. Her breath caught. "Marcus, don't—" "Relax," he interrupted, his voice turning sharp. "I'm not here to ruin your fairy tale. I just want a little help. 10,000 should do it." Her pulse quickened. "What?" "You heard me. 10 grand. I know you don't have it, but your rich boyfriend might. Unless, of course, you don't want him to find out who you really are." Melanie's throat went dry. "You wouldn't." "Oh, I would," he said easily. "All it takes is one phone call. A quick story for the press about that time you took a plea deal for theft. They'll eat it up. Billionaire's angel has a dark past. Has a nice ring, don't you think?" She felt sick. "That wasn't theft, Marcus. You know that. I took the fall for you." He laughed, a sound that made her skin crawl. "Yeah, well, what's done is done. You want me to keep quiet? You pay up. You've got a week." Then the line went dead. Melanie sat frozen. Her hands trembled as she set the phone down. The clinic noises faded into the distance. The laughter, the ringing phones, the gentle footsteps. All of it drowned beneath the rush of blood in her ears. Her past had found her again. Declan knocked softly on her door moments later. "You okay?" She jumped. "What? Oh, yeah, I'm fine." He frowned. "You sure? You look pale." "I'm fine," she repeated too quickly, gathering her papers. Just a headache." He didn't look convinced, but he didn't push. "You've been working too hard," he said gently. "Come walk with me. The garden looks beautiful today." She shook her head. "Maybe later. I have a lot to finish." Declan hesitated, then gave her one last searching look before leaving. When the door clicked shut, Melanie dropped her face into her hands and tried not to cry. That night she drove home in silence. Her apartment felt too small, too quiet. She made tea, but it went cold, untouched. Her mind replayed Marcus's words over and over. Billionaire's angel has a dark past. She'd worked years to bury that shame, years of late nights, prayer, and honest work. And now, one man's greed could destroy everything, not just for her, but for Declan and the clinic. She knelt beside her bed, her voice barely a whisper. "Lord, please, don't let this happen, not now." But faith felt distant that night. Over the next few days, Marcus called again. And again. "Time's running out, sweetheart," he said one afternoon, his tone mocking. I'll be in Atlanta Friday. Meet me or I make the call." Melanie's voice trembled. "Where?" "The old diner on Pine Street. Noon." "I don't have the money," she said. "Then you'd better figure out something," he snapped. "Or you lose it all." She hung up, shaking. By the time Friday came, dark clouds rolled across the city. The rain started just as she pulled into the parking lot of the old Pine Street diner, a place that smelled like fried onions and regret. Marcus was already there, sitting in a booth by the window, his smirk waiting for her like a knife. He looked older, rougher, but his eyes still carried that same cruel spark. "Well, look who made it," he said, leaning back. "You look good, Mel. The billionaire life suits you." "Stop it," she said flatly, sliding into the seat across from him. "What do you want?" "I told you, money. I don't have it." "Then ask him," Marcus said, sipping his coffee. "You play the sympathy card. Tell him you've got a sick relative or something." "I'm not lying to him." "Then I'll tell him myself." Melanie's voice broke. "Please, Marcus, don't ruin this." He chuckled. "You sound just like you did the night you begged me not to leave. Remember that?" Her eyes filled with tears. "You stole from that old man's account. I took the blame because I loved you. And I let you," he said with a shrug. "Guess that makes us both smart in our own way." She stood abruptly. "I'm not giving you a cent." He smirked, unfazed. "Then I'll call the Chronicle. They're already sniffing around. They love a scandal." Melanie's breath hitched. "You're lying." He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. "Want to test me?" Before she could stop herself, she reached across the table and grabbed the phone. "Marcus, don't!" He yanked it back, his voice suddenly low and dangerous. "You always were good at pretending to be holy, but you and I both know you're still the same broken little girl." Tears stung her eyes, but she stood her ground. "No, I'm not. Not anymore." She turned and walked out into the rain, her heart hammering. Marcus shouted after her, "You'll regret that, sweetheart." But she didn't look back. That evening, the rain poured hard against the clinic's windows. Declan found Melanie sitting alone in the waiting room long after everyone had left. "You missed dinner," he said gently. "I wasn't hungry." He studied her face. "Something's wrong. You've been distant all week. Talk to me." Her throat tightened. "It's nothing you need to worry about." He moved closer. "You helped me face my scars, remember? Let me help you face yours." She almost told him then, about Marcus, the plea deal, the threats, but fear stopped her. What if it changed everything between them? What if he looked at her the way people once did, in pity, or worse, disgust? "I can't," she whispered. Declan sighed softly. "All right, but whatever it is, you don't have to fight it alone." She forced a small smile. "Thank you." He hesitated, then said quietly, "I'm here for you, Melanie. Always." The tenderness in his voice nearly broke her. The next morning, she awoke to chaos. Her phone buzzed non-stop with messages. When she turned on the TV, her stomach dropped. "Breaking news! The billionaire's angel, dark past revealed." The headline splashed across the screen. Beneath it, her photo, smiling beside Declan at the clinic's ribbon cutting, flashed alongside words that made her heart shatter. Former nurse's aide pleads guilty to theft in 2015. Connection to Declan Langford raises questions about his new charity's credibility. Melanie sank onto the couch, shaking. It was worse than she'd imagined. The reporter's voice continued. Sources claim Melanie Brooks accepted a plea deal for stealing funds from an elderly patient, a case that may soon reopen as part of a larger investigation into the Evelyn Brooks Community Clinic's donors. It wasn't just her reputation at stake now. It was the clinic, Declan, everything. Her phone buzzed again. A text from Declan. "Come to the office." "Now!" When she arrived, Declan was standing by the window, the morning light harsh against his face. A newspaper lay on the desk, the same headline staring back at her. "I didn't want to believe it," he said quietly. "It's not what it looks like," she said, her voice breaking. "Please, Declan, let me explain." He turned to face her, eyes full of hurt. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I was ashamed," she whispered. "It was years ago. I was in love with someone, Marcus. He stole money from a patient. I took the blame to protect him. I lost everything, my license, my job, my reputation." Declan's jaw tightened. "And now he's back." Tears streamed down her face. "He's the one who called the papers. He's blackmailing me." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. "We can fix this. We'll call the police. We'll release a statement." But before he could finish, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and went pale. "What is it?" she asked. He turned the screen toward her. Another headline. "Evelyn Brooks Clinic under investigation. Funding frozen amid scandal." Melanie's breath left her body. "No." Declan sank into his chair, staring blankly. "They froze everything. Construction, payroll, operations. The bank wants to review every donation I made." Tears blurred her vision. "This is my fault." He looked up sharply. "No, this is his fault." She shook her head. "If I hadn't lied, if I'd told you sooner—" "Stop," he said firmly. "You made a mistake. You paid for it. You don't deserve to be punished again." But she could barely hear him. The weight of guilt crushed her chest. She turned toward the door. "Where are you going?" Declan asked. "I need to fix this," she said softly. "Even if it means leaving." "Melanie." She looked back, tears falling freely. "You gave me a second chance, Declan. Don't let me take yours away." And before he could stop her, she walked out. By nightfall, the clinic was dark and silent. The sign outside gleamed under the rain, its silver letters blurred by falling drops. Declan stood in the empty hallway, her locket still lying on the desk where she'd left it. He picked it up, holding it in his palm. "Don't do this," he whispered into the empty air. "Not after everything." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, echoing through the city. And somewhere, in a small motel miles away, Melanie sat alone by the window, staring at the rain. She pressed her trembling hands together and whispered, "God, please, if you can still hear me, show me how to make this right." The next morning broke grey and restless over Atlanta. Rain fell in soft, slanted lines against the clinic windows, turning the glass into a blur of silver streaks. Inside, the halls were still. The hum of the vending machine and the drip of a leaky faucet were the only sounds left in what had once been a place full of laughter, prayer, and life. Declan sat alone in his office, slouched forward, elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. The blinds were drawn halfway, leaving slanted bars of pale light cutting across his desk. Coffee had gone cold beside him hours ago. The newspaper lay open, its bold black headline a wound he couldn't stop looking at. "Charity scandal. Billionaire's redemption hoax. Nurse with a criminal record caught hiding truth. Langford Empire collapses after public backlash." He stared at the words until they blurred together. No matter how many times he read them, they didn't change. Loretta knocked softly before stepping in, her voice low and gentle. "You been sitting in the dark all morning, sugar?" He didn't answer. "I brought coffee," she said, placing a cup on the desk. "Though I see you already got one dying there." Declan gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thanks, Loretta." She watched him for a long moment, her expression tender but firm. "You gonna tell me what happened to that girl?" He looked down at his hands. "She's gone." Loretta's brow furrowed. Gone where? He handed her a folded note, the paper creased and soft from how many times he'd opened it. His voice cracked as he said, "She left this." Loretta unfolded it and read the neat handwriting. "Declan, I can't let you lose everything because of me. I need to make this right in my own way. Please don't look for me. You gave me grace when no one else would. Thank you." Loretta sighed, pressing the note gently against her chest. "That poor child. She's running again." "I should have stopped her," Declan whispered. "I should have told her it didn't matter what the world said, but I froze. She walked away, and I let her." Loretta's voice softened. "Maybe she ain't running from you, son. Maybe she's running from her shame. There's a difference." He looked up, eyes red. "I thought we were past that." "You can't outrun what's in your heart," Loretta said kindly. "But love's stubborn. It'll catch up to her. You just make sure you're ready when it does." Miles away, in a cheap roadside motel that smelled faintly of mildew and coffee grounds, Melanie sat on the edge of a narrow bed. A half-packed duffel bag lay open beside her. The contents, a few clothes, an old Bible, and a wallet-sized photo of her grandmother, spilling out. She hadn't eaten since yesterday. The television flickered in the corner, playing the same talk shows that kept replaying her name. Every station had a version of her face, crying, smiling, walking beside Declan, and every headline told a story she didn't recognize. She muted the sound and stared at the screen's glow, her reflection pale against it. The rain outside was steady, comforting in its sameness. She leaned her forehead against the cool window pane and whispered, "Lord, I thought I was doing right. I thought I was following you." Her breath fogged the glass. "But everywhere I go, the past finds me again." She sat back on the bed, hands trembling slightly, and opened her grandmother's Bible. It fell open to a page she'd underlined years ago, Isaiah 43:18. "Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing." Melanie ran her fingers over the verse. "A new thing," she murmured. "But what if I already broke it?" Her phone buzzed. The screen lit with a call from Loretta, then another, then one from Declan. She let them all go to voicemail. The courage to answer was gone. When the rain finally slowed to a drizzle, she slipped on her coat and crossed the street to a small church. The doors were unlocked, the sanctuary dimly lit by a few flickering candles. She sat in the back pew, folding her hands so tightly her knuckles went white. "Lord," she whispered, "I wanted to help. I wanted to build something that healed people, but maybe I was never meant to." Her voice cracked. "Please, if I've messed it all up, help me find a way to make it right." The stillness held her like an embrace. Somewhere, faintly, a recording of Amazing Grace began to play from an old speaker. She closed her eyes and wept. Back at the clinic, Declan couldn't sit still. He called every number he could think of: lawyers, reporters, investors. Most calls went unanswered. The rest were polite, but cold. The donors had pulled funding. Payroll had been frozen. The community that once cheered for the clinic had turned skeptical overnight. By afternoon, his assistant, Mr. Wright, stepped into the office holding a printed report. "Sir," he said carefully, "you'll want to see this." Declan glanced up. "What now?" Mr. Wright handed him the paper. The headline read, "Anonymous source confesses. False allegations traced to Marcus Hale." Declan sat up straighter. "Marcus Hale?" "Yes, sir. The journalist says the story was planted by Melanie's ex-fiancé. They found bank transfers, messages, everything." Declan's heart pounded. "He used her name to destroy her. Again." Mr. Wright nodded. "Looks that way. The police are opening an investigation." Declan stood abruptly, grabbing his coat. "Get me his address," Sir, maybe it's better to let the police— No. Declan's voice was calm but firm. I've spent enough of my life waiting for justice to come knocking. Not this time. Night had fallen by the time Declan found himself in the city's rougher district. Neon lights buzzed outside run-down motels. Rainwater shimmered on the pavement. He parked and stared at the address glowing on his phone. Marcus Hale's door was cracked open. Declan pushed gently and stepped inside. The man sat on the bed, nursing a drink, looking half surprised and half amused when he saw who had come. Well, well, Marcus said, setting the glass down. If it isn't the sainted billionaire, you look tired. Declan's voice was low. You ruined her life. Marcus shrugged. She ruined mine first. She left you because you hurt her, Declan said, taking a step closer. Marcus smirked. She lied to me. I just told the truth to the world. Declan clenched his fists, but he kept his voice steady. You didn't tell the truth. You twisted it. You turned her pain into profit. Marcus chuckled bitterly. You think she's an angel. Please, she's just good at pretending. Declan's voice rose, quiet but fierce. She's better than you'll ever be. For a moment, Marcus looked startled, then amused. You really love her, don't you? Declan didn't answer. The silence said enough. You think love changes anything? Marcus sneered. You'll see. The world doesn't care about redemption. It just wants a good story. Declan turned for the door. Then we'll write a better one. Hours later, Declan sat in his car outside that same small church across town. He hadn't known why he drove there, only that his heart told him to. He climbed the steps and walked inside. The sanctuary was dim, the air cool and scented faintly of wax and cedar. And there, sitting near the front, was Melanie. She didn't notice him at first. Her head was bowed, shoulders trembling. Melanie, he said softly. She turned, eyes red and wide. Declan. He walked toward her, slow and uncertain. You really thought I wouldn't find you? She stood, wiping her face. You shouldn't be here. You'll only make it worse. He shook his head. I don't care what they say. You didn't do this. Declan. No. He took another step. The man who leaked everything, Marcus Hale, they found proof. It's over. She froze, disbelief flooding her face. You're sure? I saw it myself. His voice softened. You were right to run from him, but don't run from me. Her lips trembled. I thought I was saving you. You don't save someone by disappearing, he said gently. You save them by staying. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't know how to face everyone again. He reached out and took her hands. Then don't do it alone. Let's face them together. For a long moment they stood there, the sound of rain against the windows surrounding them like a song. Finally, Melanie whispered, Declan, what if they never forgive us? He smiled through the tears he didn't try to hide. Then we'll forgive each other enough for 2 worlds. She let out a shaky laugh and leaned into him. The weight she'd carried for years finally broke, and in its place came peace. Days later, the truth hit the news. Marcus Hale had confessed to leaking false information. The city buzzed with outrage, but now the outrage was in their favor. The community that once turned on them began to rally again. Police clear Brooks and Langford in false scandal. Evelyn Brooks' clinic to reopen. Loretta called Melanie the morning the headlines changed. See, child, she said, her voice full of joy. You can't bury truth. It just waits till morning. Melanie laughed through tears. You were right again, Loretta. I usually am, Loretta said proudly. Now get back to work. You got lives to heal. A week later, Melanie and Declan stood outside the clinic. The closed sign had been taken down. Fresh flowers bloomed in the front pots. Volunteers painted a new banner that read, "Open Hearts, Open Doors." The neighborhood gathered to watch as the doors opened again. Children clapped. Neighbors cheered. The air was thick with the sound of hope, returning. Melanie turned to Declan, eyes full. "We did it," she whispered. He shook his head gently. "No, he did." He pointed upward. "We just followed." She smiled. "Maybe faith really is that simple." He looked at her, his voice tender. "You once said scars mean survival. I think this place, this whole story, is our scar. A beautiful one," she said. He smiled, the kind that reminds us we were healed. That night, when everyone had gone, Melanie stayed behind. She walked through the clinic slowly, touching each wall, each chair, each framed photo. When she reached her grandmother's picture in the lobby, she stopped. The plaque beneath it gleamed in the soft light. "Mercy is not earned, it is shared." She placed her hand on the frame and whispered, "We shared it, Grandma. You were right. It was never lost. It was just waiting to be found again." The air felt warm around her, like a blessing resting on her shoulders. Outside, Declan stood under the clinic's glowing sign, watching the rain begin to fall again. But this time it was light, cleansing, gentle. When Melanie joined him, he took her hand and said quietly, "Feels like grace, doesn't it?" She smiled, looking up at the sky. "It always did. We just had to stop running long enough to feel it." He nodded. "Then let's never run again." And under that rain, two weary souls stood in the light of mercy. Finally still, finally home. Morning sunlight broke over the city like a promise kept. It poured through the wide windows of the Evelyn Brooks Community Clinic, painting the freshly washed floors in golden rectangles. Dust motes shimmered in the air like tiny miracles. Melanie unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The quiet was thick with peace. She stood still, letting the scent of new paint, lemon cleaner, and coffee fill her lungs. For a long moment she couldn't move, just breathing, remembering. A few months ago she'd stood here under shame's shadow. Today the light was all around her. Her grandmother's words came back to her. Mercy always finds its way home. A familiar voice sounded from behind. "You look like you just saw heaven." Melanie turned. Declan leaned against the doorframe, sleeves rolled up, a smudge of plaster across his cheek. He was smiling, really smiling this time, not the polite smile he'd worn for cameras or investors, but one born from rest and grace. "You've got paint in your hair again," she said. He brushed at it uselessly. "At least it's not blood or headlines this time." She laughed softly. The sound filled the room like wind chimes. "Come on," she said. "We open in an hour. Let's make sure everything's perfect." The clinic buzzed with life by mid-morning. The front desk phones rang. Loretta's laughter echoed down the hallway. The scent of coffee drifted from the break room where volunteers talked and prayed together before starting their day. Group of children colored at the corner play table, giggling over who could draw the best rainbow. Their pictures were taped to the wall. Bright suns, smiling faces, and words written in crooked crayons. "Love lives here." Melanie paused to read them. The lump in her throat was the good kind, the kind that came when gratitude was too big for words. Declan walked by carrying a box of donated supplies. "Careful," she said. "You're still recovering." "I'm fine," he replied, smiling. "You can't break what's already been rebuilt." "Try not to test that theory," she teased. They passed Mr. Henry's room, where the elderly veteran sat humming. He waved. "Morning, Miss Melanie. Morning, Mr. Langford." "Morning, sir," Declan replied. "Feeling better?" Mr. Henry nodded. "Yes, sir. And proud of y'all. World needs more places like this. World needs more people who remember what forgiveness looks like. Melanie smiled, her eyes wet. Thank you, Mr. Henry. As they left, Declan said quietly, He's right. About what? That forgiveness has a face. Declan said, glancing at her. Yours. She blushed, shaking her head. I just did what Grandma taught me. Then maybe she taught you what angels already knew. At lunch they sat outside beneath the dogwood trees. The garden glowed with spring colors. A breeze moved gently through the leaves. Declan handed her a sandwich wrapped in parchment. Loretta made these, he said. She threatened to come out here herself if you skipped another meal. Melanie laughed. She'd probably win the argument. He smiled, biting into his own sandwich. She usually does. For a while they ate in peaceful silence, listening to bird song and the faint hum of the city beyond the fence. Then Declan asked, You ever think about what's next for you? She looked up, thoughtful. I think I'm already where I need to be. This is the next thing. Every day I can help someone find hope. That's enough. He nodded slowly. You know, I used to think redemption was a finish line, that if I gave enough, built enough, I'd finally feel clean. And now? He smiled faintly. Now I think redemption's a road. You just keep walking, and every step brings you closer to grace. Melanie leaned back on the bench, gazing at the garden. That's beautiful. I had a good teacher, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. The sunlight caught his eyes, and she thought how strange it was that the man once trapped in bitterness had become the gentlest soul she knew. By mid-afternoon, the clinic's waiting room was packed. Loretta manned the front desk like a general leading troops, organizing volunteers, greeting every visitor with hugs and humor. Declan walked around with his sleeves rolled, fixing a loose cabinet handle, sweeping floors, and chatting with patients. Nobody would have guessed he once owned half the city. One woman, a young single mother, stood up and spoke shyly. Miss Melanie, Mr. Langford, can I say something? The room quieted. She held her baby close. This clinic saved my life. I was ashamed to come here at first, but you welcomed me anyway. You didn't just heal my body. You gave me hope. Her voice broke. My little girl's middle name is Evelyn, after your grandmother. A soft gasp rippled through the crowd. Melanie covered her mouth, tears slipping free. Declan put an arm around her shoulders, steadying her. Then Loretta clapped her hands. All right, folks, let's give glory where it's due. The whole room broke into applause. Some laughed, some cried. In that moment, Melanie realized the scandal that once buried them had been turned into a testimony. Grace had made ashes into beauty. Later that evening, after the doors closed and the laughter faded, the clinic felt peaceful again. The air hummed softly with the day's leftover energy. Melanie and Declan stayed to clean up. She wiped the counters while he stacked chairs in the waiting area. After a while, he leaned on a broom and said quietly, Do you remember the night you told me not to take the cloth off? Melanie paused, looking over. I'll never forget it. I cried that night, he said. First time in 10 years. I didn't even know why at the time. I think you did, she said softly. He nodded. I thought those scars defined me, but you looked at me and didn't see what I'd lost. You saw what God still had left to give. Her eyes shimmered. You weren't the only one who was scared that night. I was too. Of what? Of failing you, of letting you see how broken I was inside. He smiled faintly. Guess that's the miracle then. 2 broken people somehow made something whole. Grace does that, she said quietly. They stood in silence, the faint hum of a ceiling fan filling the air. When they finally stepped outside, night had fallen soft and clear. The street lamps glowed. The moon hung low and round. They sat together on the clinic steps. Declan looked up at the sky. You ever think about how strange it is that every terrible thing that happened somehow brought us here? Melanie nodded. I think that's how God writes stories. He uses the ink of our pain to draw something beautiful. Declan smiled. I spent years trying to erase my mistakes, but maybe grace doesn't erase. It repurposes. Exactly, she said. It makes the broken pieces part of the design. They sat quietly for a while, the night thick with peace. Then Declan said, You know, I used to hate the man I was, but now when I look back I feel grateful, because without that man I never would have met you. Melanie turned to him, tears slipping silently down her face. And I never would have learned how strong forgiveness can be. He reached for her hand. She let him hold it. The next morning, the clinic reopened, to new faces. A little boy with messy curls came running up to Declan, clutching a crayon drawing. Mr. Declan, look what I made. Declan knelt. Wow, that's beautiful. Is that the clinic? The boy nodded proudly. That's you and Miss Melanie. Mama says you cried when you saw Hope. I drew that part too. Declan blinked back sudden tears. You did, huh? The boy nodded again. Mama says God cries too, when people finally see the good he was doing all along. Declan laughed softly through the sting in his eyes. Your mama sounds very wise. She is, the boy said, then ran off. Melanie had been watching from the hallway. She walked over, smiling. He's not wrong, you know. Declan wiped his eyes. About what? You did cry when you saw Hope. He smiled, and I think I'll keep doing it. She chuckled, her eyes bright. Good. Means your heart's working again. That evening, when the clinic was quiet once more, Declan and Melanie stayed behind. He repaired a light fixture while she arranged fresh flowers under her grandmother's photo in the lobby. The brass plaque beneath the frame gleamed. Mercy is not earned. It is shared. Melanie traced the words with her fingers. You ever think about how simple that is? She said. Declan looked over. Simple. Yeah, we make forgiveness sound complicated, but Grandma always said mercy's just grace in motion. He nodded. Maybe that's why it's so hard. It keeps moving. You have to keep giving it away. She smiled, her heart swelling. That's the secret. You give it, and somehow you end up with more. He watched her quietly for a long time, the soft light framing her face. You know something, Melanie. What? You are your grandmother's prayer answered. Her throat tightened. And you're proof that God never gives up on anyone. For a moment, neither spoke. The stillness between them was holy. They left the building hand in hand. The night air was cool and sweet. The sign above the door glowed softly against the dark sky. Evelyn Brooks Community Clinic. Declan stopped on the sidewalk and looked back at it. You ever think this place is more than a building? Melanie nodded. It's a living testimony. He smiled. Then let's keep it alive. They started walking down the quiet street. Streetlights glimmered like stars fallen low to earth. Somewhere far off, church bells rang. I used to think faith was about big miracles, Declan said. But now I see it's in the small ones, like people showing up, even when it hurts. Melanie squeezed his hand. That's how love works, too. He smiled. Then I guess we're doing both. She looked at him and whispered, We're doing exactly what God asked of us. Weeks passed. The clinic thrived again. The community grew stronger, drawn not by wealth or spectacle, but by the quiet power of love that had rebuilt everything. Morning Melanie led a small prayer circle before the doors opened. Volunteers gathered, hands clasped. She prayed softly, Lord, make us vessels of your mercy. Help us see the good you're doing even when we can't yet understand it. Declan always stood beside her, head bowed, heart steady. One morning after the prayer, he leaned over and whispered, "I think you're the reason this place runs." She smiled. "I think we're both just instruments." "Then I hope he keeps playing this song," he said, and she knew he would. One quiet night, long after everyone left, Declan found Melanie sitting in the clinic garden under the stars. She had her Bible open on her lap, her face soft in the glow of a lantern. "What are you reading?" he asked. "Isaiah," she said. "It says, 'To give them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning.' I used to wonder if that was really possible. Now I know it is." He sat beside her. "It's more than possible. We're living proof." She smiled, closing the book. "You think Grandma Evelyn would be proud of us?" He nodded. "I know she is. Probably up there telling the angels we finally stopped being stubborn." Melanie laughed softly. She would say that. The sound drifted through the garden like wind through leaves. Declan looked around at the quiet clinic, its windows glowing faintly behind them. "You ever notice how this place looks like a lighthouse at night?" "I have," she said. "It's hope made visible." He turned to her, his expression tender. "You showed me what hope looks like, Melanie. I used to think tears meant weakness. Now I know they're how the soul breathes." She touched his hand gently. "Then keep breathing." He smiled. "As long as I can, right here beside you." The stars shone brighter that night. The clinic stood silent but alive, its light spilling softly across the street. If anyone had passed by, they would have seen two figures sitting close together under the dogwoods, their heads bowed not in sorrow, but in prayerful gratitude. And perhaps they would have heard, carried on the night air, the sound of a man once broken whispering words that were half a sob, half a hallelujah. "Thank you, Lord, for the grace that found me when I couldn't find myself." Melanie's hand tightened gently around his. The world was still. The night was kind. And for the first time in their long journey through loss and redemption, both of them felt whole. Morning sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of the Evelyn Brooks Community Clinic, scattering pools of color across the lobby floor. Blues and golds danced over the tile like small fragments of heaven. The city outside was already awake, but inside, peace reigned, the kind of peace that felt like prayer answered and still ongoing. Melanie unlocked her office door, humming softly as she set her bag down. Papers, reports, and patient charts waited in a tidy stack, reminders of how far she'd come. She smiled at the framed photograph of her grandmother that sat beside the lamp, Evelyn's eyes forever kind, forever steady. When she pulled open the small drawer of her desk to file new forms, she noticed an envelope tucked beneath the folders. The paper was slightly yellowed, her name written in uneven, deliberate handwriting. Melanie. Her breath caught. She broke the seal carefully and unfolded the letter inside. "If you ever find this before I tell you in person, know that every brick of this place is a prayer I never knew how to say. You rebuilt more than a clinic, Melanie. You rebuilt me. If this world forgets our names one day, let it at least remember the mercy that built these walls." Declan. For a long moment she simply held the page, the words trembling in her hands. The edges smelled faintly of dust and cedar from his workshop. Tears welled before she could stop them. She pressed the letter to her heart, whispering, "Thank you, Lord." The sound of laughter drifted from the hallway. Melanie wiped her eyes and followed it to the break room. Declan was there, sleeves rolled, showing a teenage volunteer how to repair a light fixture. "Gentle twist, not force," he said, demonstrating. "Everything works better when you treat it with care." The boy nodded, grinning. Declan's laughter, low and easy, filled the space. When he turned and their eyes met, Melanie didn't need to say a word. She held the folded letter against her chest and mouthed, "Thank you." Declan's expression softened. He smiled, a quiet, humbled smile that carried all the words they'd never needed. That afternoon, the clinic pulsed with quiet kindness. A few patients lingered in the lobby while volunteers packed up supplies. Outside, the air thickened with the scent of rain. Melanie walked the halls, checking doors and lights. Everything in its place, everything humming like a living prayer. At closing time, she noticed a young mother standing just inside the doorway, clutching a bundle wrapped in a thin blanket. The woman's face was pale, eyes rimmed with fatigue and fear. "Can I help you?" Melanie asked softly. The woman hesitated. I don't have anywhere to go. I heard this place helps people." Without a second thought, Melanie smiled. "You heard right. Come with me." She led the woman to the small kitchen, warmed a bowl of soup, and found a clean cot in the back recovery room. The baby fussed, tiny cries echoing softly through the hall. Melanie took the child gently, rocking her with practiced ease. By the time Declan returned from delivering evening supplies, the scene stopped him at the doorway. Melanie sat in the lamplight, the baby cradled in her arms, humming an old gospel tune. The same melody she'd sung on that first night, years ago at Serenity Hills. The sound filled the clinic like light spilling into darkness. Declan stood still, letting it wash over him. He stepped closer. Voice hushed. "Your grandmother would be proud." Melanie looked up, eyes tender. "She'd say the same about you." He smiled, kneeling beside her. For a moment they watched the baby sleep, the rhythm of her breathing joining the rhythm of the rain beginning outside. The storm deepened, rain pattering against the windows, the streetlights shimmering across the wet pavement. The clinic sign glowed softly, casting halos of light into the mist. Melanie rose, laying the baby in the cot. Declan stood beside her, their reflections merging in the glass door. "You ready for the next shift?" he asked quietly. She smiled, slipping her hand into his. "Always." They stood together as thunder rolled far away, the rain washing the city clean. Behind them, the lights of the clinic burned steady, a beacon for the lost and weary, for everyone still searching for grace. And in that gentle glow, Melanie finally understood. Redemption wasn't a single act, or even a miracle won. It was the quiet, steadfast work of every new dawn. Love renewed, faith restored, mercy lived one small moment at a time. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines, it's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.